Hello, and welcome to the Insights podcast series. I'm your host, Anand Daniel. This is the fourth edition of our mini series, Grit Stories. If this is your first time, some quick context. In Grit Stories, we speak to entrepreneurs who have put India on the global tech map. This is their story, the real raw deal that highlights the difficult moments on the road to every success story. I love talking to these founders. They inspire me. We have another amazing episode lined up today. I hope you enjoy it. I have with me today Baskar Subramanian, the founder of Amagi Media Labs. Baskar has been an internet entrepreneur and startup founder for close to 2 decades. Consider this. In 2005, when he was still in his 20s, Baskar had his first successful exit from his startup. This is when, along with a few friends, Baskar started to look for new problems to solve. This group set their sights on disrupting television advertising with technology. We'll be getting into that story in this podcast. In the last decade, Amagi has come a long way. Now a truly global startup with roots in India. Let's hear all about the journey with its ups and downs from Baskar directly. Hey, Baskar, welcome to the podcast. It's a real pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you for doing this.
Great, Anand. Thank you very much for hosting me today.
Awesome. Cool. I like the Amagi flag flying high there. Yeah, so in your background.
That's our motivation. That's our motivation to be flying high. So
awesome. Cool. So for the audience who don't know Amagi, maybe a quick overview of what is Amagi and what's the scale at which you're at, whatever you want to share.
Amagi is a media technology company. And arguably, I think we are one of the fastest growing and possibly one of the slowly starting to become the largest independent media technology company in the world outside of Netflix and Amazon and Google to start with. We are building a fairly large infrastructure on a cloud capability for all the media companies to distribute their content. So in effect, what we do as a company is we are connecting two-sided market, Anand. One side is content creators and owners. And we are all seeing that there's a lot of content explosion happening. So much of content coming into our systems today. I'm sure each one of us are consuming content across many different distribution platforms, be it the likes of Netflix, to Amazon Primes, to YouTubes, to TikToks, to WhatsApps, to a lot of advertising-driven models, subscription-driven models. What Amagi does in all of this is what you don't see as a consumer is a factory that's running at the back end. Amagi powers that backend in terms of the content, what we call the content infrastructure for a lot of the OTT businesses worldwide. Whenever you're watching content on an OTT platform, there is a touch of Amagi internal, be it the likes of, we work with the likes of Roku, with Samsung televisions, to NBC in the US, for example, to Discovery, to Fox, to you name it, a lot of the brands that work with us today to kind of power their backend of all their operations from a content operations on the cloud. So we're connecting these two dots. So we're a B2B business. It's a classic SaaS B2B business, connecting the content creators and owners with the platforms worldwide. From a scale standpoint, I think the last 4 or 5 years has been fantastic from a growth standpoint. Last year, we grew by 136%. So we kind of more than doubled our revenues, which we've been continuing to do it for the last 2-3 years now. And we're seeing that sort of traction continuing for some time right now as a company. We do close to about 30 billion advertising insertions on a per annum basis. So that's sort of the scale that we actually grown.
Great. So awesome. Thank you. Thanks for that intro. We'll come back to the Amagi story in a bit. So let's start with your story. Maybe I always love to hear a little bit about the founders, where you grew up, and whatever you want to talk about your journey before becoming an entrepreneur.
Yeah. Okay. So I started in Coimbatore. So I'm a Tamil Nadu South Indian boy, classic middle class. Mother is a teacher, father is a salesperson. Somewhere in the 10th and 11th standard when I was studying is when I think I got exposed to computers. And that was like a big aha moment for me. I'm a left-hander. Come from very conservative families where right hand is considered good and left hand is considered bad. And I was also dyslexic in some sense. So in that sense, I couldn't do anything much with my hand as much. As I couldn't tie my shoelace, for example, is a big challenge for me. Even today, that's what my wife tells me. But yeah, so the challenges in terms of buttoning shirts, to all the simple things in life, what is simple for people, was always a complex problem for me. And yet these computers came in and that suddenly kind of democratized and kind of enervated my whole thing, where I could open up my mind to a computer was a much more easier connection. And suddenly you are able to kind of transform your thought process into something which is actionable without having to use your hands or any of your skill sets fundamentally. I think that was a big, big moment for me in my personal life. Then I fell in love with computers a lot. And being a middle class family, did not have access to computers at home. Obviously, it was very expensive for all of us in those days. So I actually did a deal with a chartered accountant in Coimbatore, where I said, okay, Monday to Thursday, I will actually build a product for them, software product for them. And we will get into business together. And that was my first business I started with them.
11th grade. Yeah.
And this is 11th grade. Yeah,
wow,
11th standard.
okay.
Yeah, sir. And I had one day, which is Friday and Saturday. That's 2 days they'll provide me, and nights will be available for my own learnings and whatever I want to do. So that was a big deal because you got computer time was not an easy thing at that point in time in a near tier 2 town like Coimbatore. So did actually spent almost 2 years, pretty much all the late nights with that team there. So they were chartered accountants. I was a computer programmer, so I could actually help them to build it. So we used to build financial accounting software in those days and sell it to the likes of builders and real estate agents and all of them at that point in time. Very early for its days. This is, I'm talking about 1991. That is exciting and interesting. And my parents were really exasperated with me because I was not at home at all. And then they kind of clobbered a loan of some sort and actually eventually bought me a computer when I was trying to get into engineering. So engineering was fairly clear that I have to only do computer science because there was nothing else really mattered fundamentally. Went to GCT in Coimbatore, which is like almost a neighborhood college for me. And so I could continue my business. At the same time, I could also go to college, which is kind of a very nice thing for me because that is a high motivation for me that I can do that. And we really need lecturers or people to teach us because we were actually self-learning. There was a good cohort of people together. That's when I also first time got introduced to my co-founders, which is Srini and Vidya. So all three of us went to the same college. So met in our second year of college. And we've been friends together for life, right? So that's where our journey started. All of us had the same passion in terms of wanting to build something with programming and computers and software was kind of a first love for all of us. In about third to fourth year, I think when we were starting to look for jobs, I think I remember seeing a Byte magazine, and I opened up and I saw Bill Gates with his the geeky specs on the front of the page. That sort of attracted me very, hey, what is this? A young person could actually build software, could actually build and change and disrupt industries and disrupt markets. I think that was a moment, even today, I think I kind of look back and say, that's something that I wanted to always be that. That was something of a revelation at the point in time. So decided that I would never go to work, but will be an entrepreneur all my life. So fourth year, technically, I didn't want to kind of get into campuses because it was clear that I don't want to do anything. Fortunately, we had some of our seniors who would come and said, hey, Baskar, it's all good that you want to do this, but why don't you first at least try a couple of years in a real industry? You'll know what it is before you try to do it. Over time, that it made sense. I said, okay, let's try. That was the intention. But prior to that, I wanted to do my master's. So I went to IIT Bombay for my master's. But again, then I figured out that I'm always been a self-learner all my life. So in that sense, it was boring for me to go to college again. I didn't realize it till I went there. So 3 months I spent time with, and then I found out that most kids there were trying to figure out how to ace the subjects and get good marks and then get back to good jobs and all of that, which is none of my motivation any which way. So marks didn't matter, nor because I was coming there for true education and true new things. So a lot of courses I couldn't select because lot many people did not want to take courses where professors gave you a D, then nobody wanted to go to those courses. And like computational geometry. I loved computational geometry. I couldn't get to those courses. And I packed the bags and said, I'm not going to do this course. So I dropped in the middle, came back, and joined Texas Instruments for a couple of years. So yeah, again, Srini and Vidya were already in Texas Instruments. So went there, worked for a couple of years. It was fairly clear that by 98, I was clear that we need to start something. So dropped out of TI. Basically, I went to my manager and said, hey, I need to start a company. He said, do you have a plan? I said, no, I don't. I was a good coder at that point in time. So I used to remember where 5% of all the code in TI at that particular point of time was written by me, one single person. So I was a very voracious coder, right? So I used to sit for days and tens and thousands of lines of code I used to write in those days. But again, so he was kind of very surprised to why you should have a plan, Baskar, and then do it. I said, no planning. I want to be an entrepreneur. As simple as that. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I need to try. So 98 left my job, called my dad and said, okay, I'm going to leave my job. We're going to start something new and try to figure it out. He said, okay, go ahead, do it. Very, very supportive parents in that sense. So it was really helpful. And that's where I started as an entrepreneur. 6 months later, obviously, Srini and Vidya also joined me. So we were kind of planning together, and I said, let's figure out what we want to do in life and then start off. That was the journey we started with. When we started, Anand, I don't think it was a very unconscious decision. It was not like a conscious, we didn't know what the business would be looking like. We didn't know what to do and all of that. But said, hey, we wanted to build something. We were like 24. We started off thinking, what are the problem spaces to look at? And then we hit upon the idea of wireless multimedia. And Bluetooth was just starting to happen. And Bluetooth was like, nobody knew Bluetooth as a technology. It was primarily only a geekish technology with few people looking at it. Fortunately, for us, we kind of, there was no big reason. Bluetooth was a free standard. So it was much more easier to take decisions. We were self-funded. So getting a free spec and starting to build something was a much more easier decision. So we started off with wireless multimedia. This is a company called Impulse Soft that we actually started. Three of us, and Sri Krishna is another one of my co-founders who came in. And then four of us together actually started this whole venture of building a wireless multimedia company. So that was the start of the whole journey.
And then how did that go? So the Impulse of journey.
A couple of things. One is Bluetooth was a very interesting technology because there were so many people who wanted to buy the technology, which I think we were quite lucky in that sense, right? When we started, we pretty much had many customers, the likes of Siemens to Panasonic to Acer, starting to buy from us licensed technology from India, pretty much on phone calls, right? And the internet was not really big at those times. So we were actually getting through phone calls. The company was self-funded. We could actually fund it through just by the licenses that we were actually selling, which is very good for the first 3-4 years. But our aspirations was to grow something larger. So we said, okay, how do we grow? So then we realized that software alone won't help us. We need to build the whole ecosystem of product itself. So went ahead and started building wireless multimedia headsets. I think today it's a norm, but in 2000, 2001 timeframe, nobody knew what it's going to look like. And the technology challenges was very, very, very high at that point of time. It was a kind of a major failure for us because we couldn't really sell it because the quality was not as good as what people wanted to in those days. So it kind of iPods were just starting to happen. So we launched our first wireless headphone with an iPod. So it took us almost 2 years to get to that success, what we wanted. But all of this is getting self-funded, right? So it was like, except for some angel fund of 2 crores that we could raise, we didn't raise any other money. Every month, how to get your payrolls done. So we kind of, it's a back-to-back situations on a month-on-month basis. Are you doing your collections right? Your cash flows planned ahead of time, and how do you kind of manage it? Was the challenge that we were facing. 2004 timeframe, we started building our first Bluetooth watch. So we said, okay, let's get it. The watch seemed to be an exciting proposition. So we built our watch, but and we're trying to license to Casio, to Timex, and Fossil and others. They were all very excited, but the mobile ecosystem was not there. So there was no iOS, no Androids in those days. It was primarily Nokia, Symbian phones and others. So it was a hard problem for interoperability and others. So it didn't really pick up as much as what we wanted. At that point in time, the industry was converging in terms of software, silicon, everything was converging. The semiconductor industry had started building up. The likes of Broadcom and a whole slew of companies started to really integrate software into the silicon itself. That's what they call the system on a chip, right? SoCs has become really popular in those days, right? At that point in time, obviously, a few companies, and Broadcom was one of them, came in and asked, hey, why don't we acquire you folks? Because software is good software that you folks have, but you're not going to be sustaining yourself only with software because you need either build a full system, or you need a silicon partner who is very, very tightly integrated in that. So that got us thinking, and I don't think we had any big strategy for exit or any of that, right? So the whole journey of ImpulseSoft for me is an unconscious journey. We didn't really think of anything major. Obviously, we had grand plans, but it's just like a young people just going in and trying to figure out what to do in life, sort of stuff. And 2005, we got about 2-3 offers coming in. And so we hired a banker and this went through a transaction and actually sold the company. By the end of 2005, we had sold the company. Good, bad, we didn't know, but we sold it to a company called Surf. And that was a GPS chipset company, which is getting into Bluetooth. So we kind of sold to them and said, okay, we're going to integrate all of this together and spent a couple of years with them. That was sort of where we were.
Wow, okay. So built and sold a company, bootstrapped, built and sold in your 20s
True.
itself. That's amazing.
True.
What are the biggest learnings from that journey, and maybe briefly on that, and then we'll jump into Amagi.
So I think that journey taught us a couple of things, Anand. The one is software is great, but how do you disrupt a market? If it's a large enough market, how do we disrupt it? So we wanted that aspiration kind of came back saying, hey, maybe we started something where kind of with the assumption of a very small thing. Can we start with a larger vision? That was number one learning that we had. Number two, we wanted to look at it in a maybe 20, 25-year-old time frame, not something short. let's build something larger, something which can actually kind of go beyond us. So we want to build an institution. So we were kind of going through the whole good to great and all that time frame, saying, hey, like Jim Collins experiences. And he said, hey, can we build some companies which are larger institutions beyond us as founders? Are we clock builders or timekeepers? So all of those concepts from the good to great books is what we actually take into account.
Maybe
so
a sentence on clock builder, for those.
Okay, so primarily, Anand, good to great talks about a very interesting concept of, are companies founder dependent or are they institutions by themselves, where you don't know who's the CEO or founder. You don't need to care about them, literally. It is not a leadership which is actually drives it as much as the systems, processes, and things. Like in the early days, I think HP was that, right? So if you look at HP, it was a classic company. I don't think we cared about who was leading HP as much as HP as a company had its own aura and its own mechanism how to do things, right? So a clock builder is a leader who is actually creating a clock and allowing people to see time. A timekeeper is somebody that's always sitting there, and then if you ask for time, they'll actually tell you the time. You don't want to be in the middle of that ecosystem of every time telling time to people, as much as building a clock and allowing people to look at the clock rather than actually. So building the clock is a much more important aspect, so that it's kind of, in some sense, a timeless equation that you try to build in. So that was a big motivation for us.
So you wanted to become the clock builder, and from there to Amagi, how did that happen? How long? Did you take a break? Just walk us through.
We did take a break. So 2007, we were out of that, the acquirer, the surf. So we actually left in 2008. Again, all of us were going through our, we just got married, and then we had our first child and our second child, and it's happening. All of that was happening in that duration. So we took a break. 2008 was a much more lighter year. We were pretty much out, and we were trying to debate what we want to do in life. So we were thinking through the whole thing. So when we started this, 2008 was all about brainstorming what we want to do. So we came with three specific ideas. We said it should be disruptive. It should be something that can change the marketplace. Doesn't matter which market. We don't care. We'll try to go look at the market and do it. We wanted to do something with technology, because without technology, we didn't have any sort of play per se. How can technology disrupt? Third is, we put ourselves an artificial constraint, saying we'll start in India. India, again, it was more patriotic at that point in time. In some sense, we said, okay, let's start something in India and then try to figure it out. Went through a lot of different technology and models and all of that. What was interesting for us is, I remember this is about late 2008 or 2009 timeframe. We were sitting in a park. This was Monday morning at about 11 o'clock. And I remember a small boy, he walked up to us and said, hey, can I tell you a future? Can you show your hands? He was a palmist, actually. We said, no, don't worry about it. And then we kind of shoot him away. But that thought left an interesting impression for all of us. We were talking about targeting at that point in time. And this sort of said, hey, see this person is able to target the right, because he cannot go on a road and then figure it out. This is exactly what will happen. Only if you're in a park and on a Monday morning, you're jobless for sure, right? There is a real need for you to look at a palmist for sure, right? And this person could actually identify that. So that struck us. And again, this is a nice segue for us. Was at that point, I'm thinking, okay, let's look at targeting as a problem space. And obviously, internet was very early in its days. I remember talking about, I think Airtel wanted to do IPTV and others in those days, right? And they were very, very early in these days. So it was not really happening. Then he said, okay, let's start with traditional television and move to IP and internet television as it actually evolves in the country. Let's start off with that. So started thinking about how can we do geo-targeted advertising on television. We said television in India was a national phenomenon. Lots of people watch it. It was billions of dollars of advertising that's happening. And yet, we found a David versus Goliath problem in this whole thing. The Unilevers and the P&Gs and the Glaxos, who are able to advertise their brand on television and attract audiences, versus a small-time regional player or a soap vendor or a biscuit manufacturer in smaller towns, for example, cannot afford to be on television. They can do it on a small print or a radio or something and then get away with that, but they cannot do it on the power and the compelling platform of television was not available. So we took our mission saying, hey, can we build a network where we can bring in smaller advertisers and enable them to target their own regions, and to an extent where we want to do it at almost like a street level or eventually get to individual, but obviously technology didn't exist at the point in time, to do it as targeted as possible. And when we started talking about it, this mission to a lot of the advertisers loved it. We went to a lot of restaurants and salons and dairy parlors, and they loved it. They want to be on television in only their region, and if they're going to pay a small fraction of the fee of a large television network, for example. So that was the genesis of the whole framework. We started off with this space idea saying, let's build a targeted advertising infrastructure in the country split the satellite beams that go up on television across different regions and sell it to local advertisers. The business model is fairly straightforward. It is a spot maybe nationally is costing you, let's say, 100 rupees. What you're doing is coming to Bangalore and say, hey, if you want to only target Bangalore, you pay me 20 rupees. For the Bangalore advertiser, it's a big, big thing. Hey, at 1/5 of the cost of a national spot, I can only target my city. I'm absolutely comfortable paying that because the premium is only to that particular extent of the city. If I do the same in Mumbai, in Chandigarh, in Calcutta, and in Gujarat, or wherever I want to do, then the sum of the parts becomes greater than the whole. And that means a 100 rupee spot could fetch you maybe 200 or 300 rupees for the same spot. But by colluding with many different partners coming together in different parts of the country, and then you're able to deliver that sort of value. That was the core of the business model that we kind of envisioned, at least, right, to start with.
And this technology existed, or what were the challenges of setting this up?
What we did, the first thing is, once we realized this is a business problem, we said, what is the technology available? So Srini and Vidya went across the globe. So they went to Comcast in the US, they went to Time Warner, they went to Netherlands, looked at all the latest existing technology. What we found out after that trip was, clearly this technology is very, very, first it's expensive. It was not suited for an India like this startup. And people have not done at the scale we were envisioning, Anand. The scale we were envisioning here is, can we do it across 3,000 cities in the country? And 3,000, 4,000 cities in a country like our country, nobody's done it that sort of scale. That means you need a lower cost system which can actually scale across the whole country, which is not available. So we started saying, okay, let's build this technology ourselves from scratch and started really building those capabilities. That's number one. Number two is in India, and again, in those early days, before even DTH was starting to happen, right? Tata Sky was just coming on board at that point in time, was cable operators. India has about 20,000 cable operators across the country. These are cable operators are people who take the content from satellite from the TV channel and redistribute to our homes through the pipes, right? The cable pipes that used to come to our homes. I don't know, now it's all of us go on IP, but yeah, in those days where you had cable connections coming into your homes, for example.
This is 2010 timeframe? When was this?
This is 2010, absolutely.
Yeah.
2010,
okay.
Right? So in 2010, we had to look at creating boxes, which we'll have to put it in the cable operator, where the signal, satellite signals come in, we split the signal. Specific locations, we will insert a new advertising into the signals, depending on which cable operator you are in. So we had to build these boxes, provide it in the cable operators across the country. And the challenge was the cable operators are a different beast altogether, right? They're very different sort of people from different backgrounds. And we were like software engineers. We've never kind of done real business in some sense in a country
this
like
was
India.
in Bangalore, or where were you doing all this?
No, we were doing it we were starting to really expand it across the country. I remember going to Patna, to Kolkata, buildings that you wouldn't even thought of. I've never kind of experienced the country as much as what I experienced in those days. Is going into a lot of the tier 2 towns, into specific cities where we had to really, we've done a Gaya, for example. We went to Gangtok. You name it, like Mohali, not even Chandigarh, right? Next level of towns, Ludhiana, for example.
Yeah.
And each one of them have very powerful cable operators who are like local mafias in those regions, right? They're really strong and politically connected in those regions. I remember going into places where they used to ask me, what's your gun license, right? So we are like poor software engineers and we're trying to figure out what's your gun license. So it was kind of scary places to some extent. Kind of got, so it was, I think today it's fun, but in those days it was harrowing to go across the country trying to make deals with them. They don't understand the technology. They said, hey, we don't understand technology. How much money are you going to pay us? Tell me that. Simple. It's like a hafta deal, right? So it's a tax that you're going to pay us. Tell me what you're going to put and how much of money you're going to pay. That was the sort of conversations we were having. It was hard, but we were in the business, so we tried to really put that whole infrastructure together. We had a two-sided market problem there as well, right? So if you don't have the infrastructure, then we cannot split it. If we don't split it, we cannot sell advertising, nor the channels are going to allow us to do that. So that's what we actually started building that out. We thought, okay, this is, well, at least we got the infrastructure in place. And fortunately for us, I think our investors, the angel investor who had invested in Impulsoft, invested in the company as well, which is Nadathur, N.S. Raghavan. His family was sweet enough to not even ask us any question. They just signed a check and said, hey, go ahead and try this out, right? So in that sense, we were very, very lucky from an angel and from a Series A standpoint, right? So that helped the company to kind of fund all of these capabilities, for example. But the other part of the problem was really the channels. The channels said, okay, you're going to really go split my satellite beams. I don't know what content are you going to place. What happens if you put in content which is derogatory or anything else that happens? So we are out of control from a system standpoint. And we don't know how to sell advertising. So we're not going to buy your technology. So that became a big stumbling block. So they didn't want the technology. They said, hey, we've never done local advertising in our lives as television. So you folks do it. That was a big change from a company standpoint where we were starting off as a technology company. Then now we're already started putting the infrastructure. So we are actually getting infrastructure, managed infrastructure in some sense. Now at a point where we had to really build a business model on top of it to prove that local advertising can work, where we had to create ad sales teams across the country and buy inventory from these people. So these people, all the channels said, I'm not going to do anything, just let's buy inventory from you. So we had to buy advertising in 30-second ad spots from the channel at 100 rupees or whatever the money they're asking for. Take the risk of splitting it across different regions, selling it to different local advertisers. It's a perishable commodity. So when you buy it, you should have already sold it, right? So we went through the whole process of creating the infrastructure. I had hundreds of sales people on the field, ad sales teams across the field in different local cities across the country. Got them to, then we figured out that a TV creative was not an easy thing to do. So creating a television creative is very different from putting a print advertising. So built a studio inside the company where we started generating thousands of TV creative advertising. Not the most creative ads, but clearly advertising that we could actually create from a lot of templates and then create the whole communication from a TV creative standpoint. And so we had TV creators, we had music directors in the company, we had people who could actually do voiceovers. And then we are actually having ad sales teams that we had built on top of it. Then we had people who were negotiating with distribution for cable. We had people who were negotiating with channels for advertising inventory. So suddenly a company which technology was the smallest part of the whole equation. And we had built a complete business model on top of it. And we're trying to start off with that. That was the year of 2010 to 12 was that particular phase that we were going through on the company.
I know you changed models slightly later, but walk us through the next phase of growth. Yeah.
So 2012, Anand, was an interesting year because we were trying to, I think the David and Goliath model kind of dropped, kind of the pennies dropped for us. That it may not scale as fast in India because the number of SMBs is an attractive proposition. But if you're going to do tens of thousands of rupees each advertiser, how many are going to really do to build a company of hundreds of crores or even thousands of crores that we want? It's like Herculean task. So fairly clear that the problem. So we took a kind of I call an in principle call change that we did is why don't we figure out that even large advertisers have the same targeting problem in the country. India is a very unique country, right? We are very culturally different in different parts of the country. Even if you are a Unilever or a P&G or a Coke or even a Pepsi, there is nothing called a national brand. Interestingly, we learned that actually everything is a localized brands, or there is needs at the local level which is much more attractive. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Take Horlicks, for example. We figured out that 90% of Horlicks gets sold in Bengal and Tamil Nadu, only two regions. 90% of all Horlicks in the country is getting consumed by these two nations, for example. So you had, for example, sandalwood soaps are very good till about the Vindhyas, right? In some sense, below is when sandalwood is used as soap. People don't like it. We had, for example, we were talking to the Lux marketing manager, and very interesting, right? Lux White sells in UP. Lux Pink sells in MP. Don't ask me why, but culturally, that's the way we are as a country, right? So then we figured out that was an interesting moment for us, saying, hey, if a Unilever has so many use cases that they want to really do that. For example, ice creams are very metro phenomena. For example, they had Magnum ice creams, which they wanted to do in metros, for example, right? So suddenly Whirlpool's, again, this is a very interesting thing, was Whirlpool's largest market is Punjab for washing machines. We said, what does washing machine got to do with anything else? Then we figured out in Punjab, people use it for lassi, making lassi. So washing machines are not used for washing clothes, but to actually churn the lassi out of it. So it's a big market where it's a product for a washing machine, but actually used in Punjab for lassi making. So it's a big market for Whirlpool, right? so
yeah.
And interesting things, right? So I remember talking to the marketing manager in Indulekha. I know Indulekha is a hair dye, right? Yeah. Hair dye's biggest market is UP. I said, how can market be very large in a UP? Then they figured out in UP, there people use it to dye the cows. Black cows actually sell better than white cows. Oh. So before you go to the market, they use Indulekha to just make it a nice, good black cow, sell that in the marketplace. And Indulekha was very good because it takes 2 months to get the hair dye out of your stuff. So before 2 months, the market is over, people have sold it, then it becomes a white cow again. So it was an interesting country, interesting sort of learnings that we had. So we flipped that model at that point in time and said, okay, we were going to get national advertisers because it's the fastest way to grow. And interestingly, everybody loved it, right? So I remember going into Unilever where the CEO of the company brought in all his strategy teams and said, how do we do this together, right? So it was kind of fairly well-evolved problem. And the likes of Unilever...
Just to be clear, the thing is big company. Now I'll help you sell the washing machines to Punjab and the dyes to the...
Absolutely.
Okay,
so for example, a classic, right? For example, we went to Glaxo. Glaxo said, we told Glaxo, we will allow you to buy only in Bengal, additional. So although you're watching Colors or a ZTV or whatever you're watching, but in Bengal, you will see Glaxo's Horlicks ad. That means they could increase their share of voice in those markets, wherever they see the larger stuff, right? And for example, Wipro used to do a lot in Maharashtra because that was a big market. So we pretty much increased that market share in Maharashtra by definition using targeted advertising. They had a full case study internally to do that. So you were able to kind of slice the market into states, not cities here, states for these people, and increase their share of voice in those specific cities because they couldn't get a uniform reach across the different locations. And they want to always match their share of voice to share of market. Share of market is very different because Maharashtra might be higher, Gujarat might be lower, but you can match your share of voice to share of market very interestingly using model. So we built math models on top of it for them to kind of do all of these capabilities. Once hitch that we kind of did not look into or consider is these are the same advertisers who've been buying from the channels directly. Now the channels got antsy about this whole thing. So if we start selling to a Unilever will eventually start dropping the budgets they're going to spend with their sales teams and start spending it through Amagi because targeting is a better option. There's no two ways about it, right? That started the whole friction between the broadcasters as a supplier of ours and ourselves. And we were fondly thinking that it's a two-sided market with good market dynamics, which is not true because we were working with maybe top 4 of the largest TV channels in the country. And they pretty much held maybe 90% of all the advertising revenue comes from that bouquet of channels that's coming from there. So decision was now listed with 4 or 5 people could decide the fate of our company, literally, in that sense. Although we were kind of scaling dramatically fast, right? We were like, because advertisers loved this model, broadcasters found this to be a threat. So that's when 2014-15 timeframe was kind of, they did multiple things. First, they said, hey, they will limit the number of advertising we can do with the national advertisers. So that's sort of, they limited the brands that we can actually do. We had to prove that these brands would have never gone national. So we had to prove that cannibalization wouldn't have happened to them. So they started putting constraints, which started becoming an irritant in some sense. Our own advertisers, because the media agencies couldn't really understand, why are you putting so much of limitations? We cannot do planning based on so many limitations. So it started creating an irritant first it started as an irritant. Then they started increasing supply price, because they could control the supply price. So we were already at some point of paying 40 to 50% premium than their largest advertisers. Right. So we were the largest advertiser for some of these channels, and we were paying premium on top of it, almost close to 50% of their existing price. That started making the business model unviable in terms of our margins, because yes, the targeting is a beautiful model. It can give you the premium you want, but it cannot suffice the greed of everybody, unfortunately. It has to come back. So that model's fundamental flaw was that we didn't have a clear, the supply was not under control in some sense. So the economics of supply, both in terms of limitations, constraints, and the price models, started to start becoming very jerky. So we had a situation in 2014-15 where we had hundreds of crores of business with each of these channels that we were starting to do. And yet the shaky business model was dependent on 1 or 2 people who could pretty much close the supply, tap the supply, reduce the supply, do all of that, which kind of started really, the whole edifice could drop off or things like that, which was very, very, very scary for the company at that point in time. So we were kind of in a hard place at that point in time where we had a large business, and yet the business had a fundamental foundational element, which has been kind of not looked after in some sense, which could kind of threaten the whole business to some extent, right? So that was the situation where we had in 2015.
Got it. And so how did you get out of this? Or what was the next phase?
So fortunately, Anand, at
Because
least by
you're constrained
2000,
by the supply, right? So they could
correct,
strangle you
absolutely.
any point, right? So
Absolutely,
yeah.
right. Absolutely right. So about 2014-15 timeframe was also the time when we started looking at expansions across the globe. So we are starting to, because this problem was kind of a very big irritant for all of us. We said, hey, something wrong in this. I think it's a good, revenue is growing, it's great, top lines are growing, but we know there is a problem in this business model. So we kind of thought it's going to come to head sometime. And our idea was that we'll become large enough that we can control the supply ecosystem, which is not easy. It was not. We thought that maybe at maybe 500 to 1,000 crore range of buys, we'll become the largest buyer in the country, and then we can kind of strangle them, or at least kind of control the supply to some extent.
Yeah.
But before that journey could happen, 2014-15, we also, given our technology backgrounds, we had built a lot of things on the cloud. We had started investing in the cloud. We started understood broadcasting deeply. We understood all these media businesses and how they work and what are the economics and everything else that was clear. What we found also was broadcasting was the most laggard-ish business in terms of adoption of new technology. These are all people who have been doing this for the last 25 years, the way they were doing it. So it is fairly clear that there could be a disruption in the technology element itself. So what we did was we started a skunkworks project inside the company in about 2014, where we actually put a small set of engineering teams and said, hey, let's build a cloud only 100% of the cloud and operational systems which can actually replace the broadcasting infrastructure that they all run on servers on-prem. It was too early for its days, but we said, okay, let's start off with that. So we went to shows, we started showing to customers. People used to roll their eyes saying, hey, cloud is all too far away. We're not going to do all of that. But we were trying to start to invest in that in 2014-15 timeframe. 2015 and 16 was when we kind of found out that this model is breaking, or at least can break any time. We had to take the switch. So I remember going to our board and they saying, hey, you know what? This is good, but it's not going to grow for us. We think we should actually invest in.
How big were you at that time, and how much?
We were at about 145 crores of revenue, and maybe run rate was much higher, but yeah, at least revenue for the previous year. And we had raised about $35 million raised, and all of that money was kind of getting sucked into pushing it into primarily buying ad inventory, selling it. There's whole cash flow problems that we were trying to address in some sense, right? So I remember going to the board and saying, you know what, we're going to really have to stop this and actually start investing as a technology company. And we see a huge potential for creating a SaaS business where we can actually kind of completely transform the operational elements of these broadcasters and TV channels worldwide on a back-end infrastructure.
So moving from a marketplace 145 crore to a SaaS business, which you have to start from scratch almost.
Correct.
And
correct.
India
We were at about
going global.
We were like doing at about 2 crores or something, right? Roughly that range is where we had done some 2-3 customers. We kind of trying to start to look at it.
How many employees at that time?
So the employees, obviously we had, as I told you, we had about 80 to 100 ad sales teams, which is like this completely different team. Yeah. Technology team was about 40 people. So it was not big because all of the technology was actually built out and only for India we were doing, and a small skunkworks that was happening, 40 people team. So roughly, give or take, we were at about 130 people, roughly, right? 130, 140 people. That's where we were actually as a company. Now is the time where we are going back and saying we're going to really fire all of the ad sales teams, fire the whole aspects, become a 40 people company, then re-evolve ourselves and actually build the sales teams across the globe and actually put it out. That was kind of a very extremely big decision. I think our board was not really amused at the time. They said, hey, this is not the reason why we invested in the first place. 2 crore in revenue versus 145, 150 crore revenue. Are you trying to tell me that you're going to replace all of that? How will we go back to our ICs? How are we going to do this? It was a big, big, big moment for everybody at that point in time. I don't think as a company we could take that decision easily. So I remember the board saying, no, we're not going to agree on this at all. Go back. And they wanted to also tap down the investments we were making in the technology, because they said, hey, why are you spending on technology? You should be spending more and more money on technology because you're going to drain money on the advertising sales business. Why are you doing this? So at that point in time, we had to take a call. So I told my board, no. We think we have to invest in technology. Even that's money well spent, I can tell you, because technology can at least allow us to survive and grow and become successful. And we started really doing that investments. It was also a time, about 2016, 17 is when I think the board also aligned with us saying, okay, let's do this. Let's go ahead and do it. And that was kind of very challenging because suddenly we had to cut the company to half or even less than half by sending people home. And it was a time which is very emotional for me personally and for my founders, right? Co-founders, Srini and Vidya, because these are people who slogged with us pretty much from 2010, 11 timeframe to about, this is, I'm talking about 2016, 17, we're like 5-6 years. Amazing amount of sales teams were doing a very good job because it was not easy to sell. And then with all the constraints that I told you about the broadcasters put in, but yet there's a time where we had to say goodbye to all of them, right? It was very, very hard moment for all of us, but we took the time and had to be aggressive in terms of communicating, telling people the reality, kind of apologizing, going through that whole emotions with people. At the same time, the people inside the company were also scared what's happening because we were all building this and suddenly this is gone. So what's going to be the future of this company? So we had current employees who were trying to figure out what's happening. There are employees that we are letting go on one side, and these are all good friends, and even today they are good friends. But yeah, it was a very hard decisions. We had to find out jobs for them, find out how to do this whole thing. And we had the money was draining the bank. And you had a board which is completely skeptical. So we are in a situation which is like completely all guns on you in some sense of what's going to happen in some sense, right? So that we were at 2 crore revenue. So we had really start of that scratch, literally in some sense. But only thing what we figured it out, it's 2016, 17 was a big watershed moment. And again, we've been lucky, Anand. More than anything else, I think the market turned at the right time. So if the market's not turned, we would not exist today in some sense, right? So the market turned where suddenly cloud-based approach of virtualizing your operations on the cloud started to become a natural phenomenon for the broadcasters and the content creators. Second thing that happened is in the US, what we call the free ad-supported streaming TV models had started evolving. The likes of Roku and Samsung and others started really evolving new models, which is completely advertising-driven models of consuming content, which was kind of an amazing new concept that they brought in. The growth was very, very attractive. So suddenly we were in the right place at the right time. So in 2016, 17, the market started kind of showing an uptick for us. And so just to give you, we were 2016, 17, we were doing about 2 channels. Today we do 550 channels as a company, the number of channels that we launched in our systems. And we're doing about few thousands of hours of content per month. Today, we do 100 million hours of content per month today in terms of the viewership that we have in the platform. So this 4 years has 4 tremendous changes that's happened. We bet on the right place, but I think more importantly, the market turned for us at the right time. If the markets did not turn, it would have been very hard. But the markets started turning around and saying, hey, this is a beautiful technology, they want to use it. We are well ahead of the marketplace. We had a technology advantage differentiation. And we knew the marketplace. We were talking the right language with our customers. So right place, right time, right set of people. I think that made the magic, Anand, in terms of that shift that we did. I would call it a lucky break in some sense, right?
No, but it took a lot of time, right? It took like two years, looks like it, right? So
Absolutely.
for you to make this pivot and
True.
you and the co-founders talk us through that phase, because what we're trying to cover is like some of these grit stories, like it when you look back, what kept you going, or how?
No, at that point of time, I think Anand, we had 2 choices. Realistically, as a company, is to shut down the company at that point in time because the first thesis of the company was not something that's going to hold true going forward.
Though you were doing good revenue, you could see the writing on the wall that this won't scale beyond a certain point. Maybe sell it or wind it down.
Exit it out or whatever in some fashion, and then look at a entirely new business model as a new avatar of the company. That was that's one thought process that was running in our mind. But the other thought process was we did not want to, again, very classic middle class mentality of our 3 of us was we don't want any of our investors to lose their money. That was I don't think we can even grasp it for ourselves. So it was fairly clear that none of our investors should ever lose a single dollar that they've invested, and they should only make profits out of this company. So there was a big emotional aspect to it. I wouldn't call it rational, but it was irrational, but emotional to some extent. So we said, okay, we will hunker down, do the next model, make sure that all of these investors actually are successful, because eventually that's important. At the cost of, because if we bring this model to an exit right now, people wouldn't have made as much of our money that they actually invested fundamentally. So because this business model is extremely hard, very less buyers would have existed. Obviously, TV channels are interested in buying it out, for example, but they're not going to make the sort of the returns that we want our investors to make at that point in time. So that was a big choice we made, saying in the same company, we will pivot. So yes, so we will kind of leverage our same technology teams, but kind of cut the teams, shape it, reshape it, and actually start that whole thing. So three of us came together and said, because we are already, that's about 2016, 17, I'm talking about, we'd already spent 6 years in the company. And obviously, yes, we had a 25-year dream, but looks like 6 years was a bad dream. That's at least in the point of where you are. It looks like you're coming back to ground zero after doing all the hard work, traveling around the country, doing things. And I remember all of us, and Srini was a salesperson. So he was like in Bombay and Delhi and Chandigarh and Ludhiana pretty much every week. So we spent a good amount of time doing all of this. And then suddenly you see that's coming to a knot. Was a hard decision. I think three of us sat together and said, hey, what do we want to do at this point in time? Do we throw in the towel and then restart again? Or we continue this journey and then do it? I think the biggest guiding post for us was making our investors successful. And we said, okay, we can turn it around. And we got our close employees, and I'll talk about some of the people who are really, really some of the most support pillars for us as a company as well. These are the people who really came and said, hey, we will support you to whatever you do. And we want to be part of this ecosystem. Tell us what you want to do. We will come around and turn it. A lot of them went without salaries for a few months because we were kind of at a very bad phase where we are actually so people are ready to invest in the company at that point in time, which is, I think, beautiful. Some of our employees actually walked in and said, hey, we can invest some of our monies back into the company if you want to. That was a very emotional moment for us, saying, hey, if employees trusted us, and we should trust ourselves and actually start to move about and trying to
so that kind of implies you had raised 35 million but didn't have too much of cash left at this time, and you had to
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. True, right?
So when is the next time you raise capital? And from this, you decided around 14, 15, you said, till that.
Yeah. See, the last capital we raised is 2016, which is when the capital is coming in. And then post that, we had to take this decision. Almost in a year's time, we had to take this decision as they came in, right? So we had to take the decision that this is not the business model. Although they were investing in the business model, beyond that, we had to take a decision less than 12 months or maybe around 12 months, right? 2017, we had taken a decision that we'll not do this, right? So 2016, December was my last fundraise as a company. We've not raised money at all after that. And the reason is we went down below from a bank account standpoint to a point where it's almost looking very precarious as a company, to the point where we are now completely profitable and cash generating, and the company is completely profitable. So we don't need the money. In fact, I've been avoiding primary money because there's no reason for the company. So we kind of being able to grow, we're able to redeploy the money. So there's a magical turnaround and a lucky turnaround in some sense in the last 4 years, what we've seen because of these markets kind of changing. I see lots of our employees are people who worked with us at ImpulseSoft. So they kind of, we've all worked together almost from since the age of my 24 years of age. I've worked with them for more than 20 plus years right now with some of them. So they were part of my previous company, and they're also part of Amagi in some sense. So in that sense, we've been very fortunate to work with a few people who've been part of these two ventures and kind of continued with us as individuals, right? So that's what they've been able to do for us, because they built that emotional support and emotional stuff to do it. And they kind of completely trust us.
So maybe any further thoughts on this phase as you made the pivot and into going global from product tech team?
I think when we started this whole journey, obviously it was with an idea. So I think that phase of global expansion, Anand, was kind of a start of trying to validate the thesis that we had started off with the assumption that people want to do everything virtualized and go to cloud, right? So we started talking to customers. One thing we realized is the broadcasters, the large enterprises, were very slow to adopt. They did not want to change. Most of the CTOs were they were there in the company for the last 25 years. They don't want to go change things dramatically. And that too, a startup starting from India, trying to tell them to go to the cloud was a much, much, much larger problem for them to address. Fortunately for us, we saw a lot of digital first companies, millennials who actually built content for YouTube. Suddenly they've all become large enough that they wanted to be television networks themselves. The aspiration was there, and they've never seen a hardware gear in their lives. They've all done on YouTube by everything doing on a digital computer, for example, right? So they've never seen any hardware, servers, nothing in their lives. That was a beautiful kind of match of competencies in terms of skills that we could bring in as a technology skill and the content creation skills. So that was the first set of customers we started evolving, where new companies which were actually evolving wanted to be large TV networks themselves, and they were trying to grow, and we were able to provide the right technology elements for them, which kind of fit into their ecosystem of everything on a cloud, on a browser that you can actually build things. I think that was a big moment of change that happened. And we started riding that wave. In the interim, obviously, the broadcasters started changing. So that wave was first getting that connect was challenging till we kind of got it all started in the heart of LA and New York, where things started happening. These digital first companies are evolving, mushrooming. There was the likes of Roku and YouTube TV and others also coming up. So you had a very what I would call a new energy in this whole ecosystem. The media was transforming. The transformation, we were kind of the heart of the transformation because we could actually. So Srini moved to Los Angeles with his family. So that kind of gave us a big fill up, and because he could actually be in the heart of that whole transformation. We were speaking technology. There were content creators who were creating content. There was new distribution platforms evolving day in and day out. So we were in that cauldron of change that was happening. And that, I think, was a very, very exciting moment for us as a company. Although we were coming from a lot of scars of our older businesses, we were very, very conservative in terms of thinking through. We didn't know whether it was a good silver lining that we're seeing. We're seeing growth. But at that point of time, also, we kind of holding ourselves back. Hey, is it really going to be large, or is it something that we're going to have problems like what we did in the India business? Because India business grew very well, and then we actually found structural issues. So that was kind of what I would call a more of a conservative approach to looking at things. So in fact, that's the reason we didn't really go about investing berserk. So for example, I think when we look at the numbers for us, is typical SaaS numbers. All our numbers are so attractive from a SaaS standpoint because we've not invested in sales as much as what a typical SaaS company would have done. Right? Our LTV to CAC is 12 times or 13 times. So It's not even 3 times, 4 times, 12 times, 13 times, right? Yeah. So it was a very conservative approach to start with. We didn't know whether we are in the right place, right time. We're seeing the growth, we're doing everything, and we were doubling growth even without sales teams. So it didn't make sense to really add sales teams. So that was sort of the phase we were actually going into. It took us almost a couple of years. In 2019-20 is when we started thinking, hey, it's real, it's for real, it's happening. We are at the center of this whole ecosystem. And we are growing by word of mouth. So customers calling us pretty much, right? Leads were coming in. So we were not doing a lot of sales.
Like, just give me if you're comfortable, somewhat.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, absolutely. Let me give you some examples of customers, right? For example, we have a customer called TasteMade. Okay. TasteMade is an interesting brand, digital first brand out of the US. Yeah. These guys created food and lifestyle content for the millennials, right? So very interesting content. They were growing as a company, and we were their partners in progress, right? Everything technology for them is Amagi.
And where do you take them to? Like, what do you do for them?
We enable them to distribute their content across multiple channels. We create linear channels for them. We create all their VOD content for them. We do the advertising, monetization for them. So we prepare their content, create their metadata, everything, all the EPG program guides that go into your platforms. We distribute their content into all the TV platforms in the US. We started off with Anand. For example, and when I say TV platforms, the TV platforms in the US have changed. It's not the Comcast and the Dish TVs of the world, but it's really the Rokus, the Samsungs, the YouTube TVs, the Sling TVs. You had an entirely new IP-connected distribution platforms that evolved. Mm-hmm. So we were the port of choice to kind of take them across all of these capabilities. Once we did it, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was saying all the new generation of content and all the new generation of distribution also.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah,
absolutely. Cool. So we were connecting these dots, right? Connecting. For example, if you open up Apple TV today, you'll see that content, which is all distributed by Amagi into their platforms, right? So we Apple TV, Amazon Prime, IMDb TV, you name it, we were kind of starting to distribute this content for them. This is one example of a customer.
God. No,
and the customers could be very different, right? For example, beIN Sports. We do a lot of soccer for them. So we were actually orchestrating live sports matches for them on the cloud, everything on the cloud, never had any hardware. So from on ground, you directly get your streams onto the cloud where you're inserting your graphics, you're inserting your advertising, preparing the whole content, switching cameras, and actually eventually delivering to end consumers, either on a Roku box or a Samsung television set or a YouTube TV or a Sling. Again, we are at the center of that equation in terms of the technology that we provide today, for example.
Awesome. That's a good segue. Maybe as you look into the future, what excites you? Where do you see all this going? Yeah.
I think we're in an amazing time, Anand, in terms of the transformation. I think we are in the midst of a big transformation that's happening across the whole media ecosystem. This two-sided market, as I told you, content creators and content distributors, they're evolving. They're becoming like it's a true marketplace that's evolving. If you're a content creator of premium content, you have thousands of distribution points today worldwide that you can actually distribute and make you can actually monetize it either through subscription or from advertising today. The technologies are becoming, I think the experiences as consumers are changing. So I think we started off with a very simple vanilla television-like experience on OTT today. I think we are at the cusp of data-driven changes that are happening. And that's one of our biggest focus areas is how can we leverage viewership data? How do we leverage deep scanning of content in terms of all the learning that you can get from the content itself? How do we mix these two together, creating more compelling, personalized user experiences, Anand? So we think it will be personalized sports and news and entertainment that you're going to have. And that's the world where I think we are kind of starting to put a lot of our roadmap is trying to start to move towards those directions and building those capabilities as we move forward.
And for a naive question, so like maybe outside and people think most of this is Netflix and one or two large platforms. Is that not the case, or is that enough?
Absolutely. If you look at it, Anand, if you look at it, just to give you some kind of context, right? Yeah. If you look at just the subscription revenue worldwide is about $250 billion.
Okay. Wow.
In television, right? Netflix is $25 billion. Just if you look at from a run rate standpoint where we are as a company, right? Roughly to give you, right? That's 1/10 of that all subscription revenue alone, right? Ecosystem. Then you have advertising revenue, which is another $200 billion that's available. So it's a $500 billion market, roughly, Anand, that's going through the transformations. There are companies which are large, like the Netflix and the Amazons and others, but they all would somewhere be in the 20%, 10 to 20% range is where they are, right? A whole slew of things are happening primarily because of regions, geographic spreads that you have. Content, how much amount of content that one company can aggregate is very less. And even if you're a Disney, for example, and Disney's been there forever, even then they have a marketplace, but they're also about 25, 30 billion or $50 billion markets. You see markets which are much, much, much larger that are evolving, Anand. So we see a fracturing of this distribution platforms that are happening. And that's already happened. It's not like, although I think some of us, we think Netflix is our end of the world in terms of what we watch, the whole world is so fractured, right, in terms of the content behaviors. And roughly the world is watching on an average about anywhere from 3.5 to 5 hours of content per day. So that's not so that's the amount of content that's getting watched across from a per individual basis, right? Across, depending on the countries where you are today, for example. So dramatic changes are happening. And just about, I'll give you examples, right? Take a Roku, for example. Roku has grown dramatically. That's just one part of a single free ad supported model, for example, Roku. YouTube TV itself has grown. Sling TV has grown. So each one of these are growing dramatically faster. And you're getting new ways, right? Take a television manufacturers are coming in a different form. Take the Samsungs of the world and the LGs of the world. They are having their own view of how they're bringing content together. So I believe it's going to be very fractured, Anand, because social, for example, is a big platform. We are all watching on Facebook, maybe, and WhatsApp and TikTok. So content viewing is a fractured ecosystem, and that will continue to be there. And you have content creators across the globe and creating across so many sub-genres and micro-genres that we're seeing in terms of content behavior creation, both sports, news, everything else. I think that's the marriage of those two, where we see the biggest innovations that we can bring in.
Awesome. You're in a good intersection of all this that's happening.
Absolutely.
Maybe yours truly has been a good story for about more than a decade. You've been at it and going strong. So any words of wisdom before we sign off, or to the founders who are going through this for the first time? Yeah.
At least personally, I think I have a philosophy that journey is the destination, end of it. Because there's no real destination as much as if you're not enjoying your journey every day and doing that's the way we look at it. So it's almost like going back to old karma, and then you do your job and then get things done. Very similar is the way I have been kind of looking at entrepreneurship, not as some final destination that you're going to get out or exit or whatever it is. Those are all things that can happen in the background, but largely every day, how do you kind of perform and how do you kind of look at it as almost like what Bezos says as day zero. Yeah. That I think has been a very interesting. That's the way we see it as three of us, and I think that's been a big important part of our journey as we speak, right? And the other one is market. Market makes Anand. At the end of it, all of us can be either great or lousy entrepreneurs or whatever we want to call ourselves. But I think all of us are children of the market. If markets happen, we are successful. If markets don't happen, does not matter who we are. We are not successful. So the biggest learning for us is we are all really slave to the markets. So
Pick
customers
the right
start
one.
to pick the right one. When it's growing, it's growing.
Yeah.
You are just part of that whole journey. You cannot, although we can think ourselves as market makers, but I think eventually we are all part of a larger ecosystem of structures coming together, and you were just there, stars aligned, and you were there at the right place, right time. Ability and opportunity as an entrepreneur to execute at that point of time is the most critical thing that we see. Right?
Awesome. That's great. Wish you and the team at Amagi the very best. Thanks for doing this and sharing your story.
Not a problem, Anand. Not a problem at all. Thank you very much for taking time, and thank you for hosting me today.
So there you have it, folks. That is Baskar from Amagi. What a journey. And to hear it from someone who has spent over 15 years in an industry as transient as media and advertising. I think my biggest takeaway from this chat has to be that strong technology, backing a strong product, is still only a small piece of what it takes to build a company that lasts. What will tide you through always is how well you understand the industry and adapt to it, and how strong a team you have built that sticks with you through thick and thin. Thank you so much, Baskar, for this chat, and thank you, listener, for joining us on this podcast. Please subscribe to our podcast if you haven't already, and please do tweet us at Axel_India. We'd love to hear from you on things that are going well and what we could do better. Our website is c2scale.com/insights, where you can find other interesting episodes from our series. That's all from us today. Stay safe, sanitized, and gritty. Thanks again for listening. Goodbye.